My name's Tom Jennings, and this is the 24 Frames cast. I don't think it is hyperbolic of me to say that one of the most profound and meaningful films I have ever seen in my life is Robert Zemeckis' 1997 science fiction epic, Contact. Humankind meets alien film often results in the flattening of cities and various forms of conflict. But Contact was a kind of breath of fresh air for me. I won't deny it, when I was around in the 90s, I really enjoyed the science fiction disaster film Independence Day. But it's fair to say I haven't really watched it since the 90s, and I must have watched Contact about at least 10 times since, possibly even more. And it's a film that the more I watch it, the more I believe it is one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, possibly, for me, the greatest science fiction film of all time. And a lot of it has to do with the profound personal impact this film has made of me. I think it's fair to say I spent most of my life believing that religion was simply wrong. It seemed such a simplistic explanation for how the world came to be and how it worked. And I always used to find it particularly annoying when people would say things like, this is all part of God's plan. And it always begged the question, what religion is the one that is correct? What is this plan that this God has for us all? And it seems hard when I remember when I was 17 having to attend the funeral of a friend of mine who was hit and killed by a drunk driver, and watching his family and younger brother and sister in floods of tears, how any God could allow such a thing to happen. And I have been in the room where people have tried to explain this to me, that it is all part of a plan, part of a journey. And it all seemed rather perverse to me in a way. And I think it's fair to say that for many years I was incredibly dismissive of people's personal beliefs. And as time has gone on, I've realised that this is something far more complicated. And even if I don't believe that an all-powerful God actually exists, I believe faith still matters. And I think that no better is this explored than in Contact. So to begin talking about Contact, I have to ask a question, which is, if you had an experience that completely changed your life, but you had absolutely no way to prove that it happened, would anyone believe you? That is basically the question that is at the heart of Contact. And the reason this film fascinates me is because it quietly flips the entire argument between science and religion upside down. And it does so in such an intelligent and humane way that I think it is impossible not to be impressed by the film's theological positioning. Contact is a film about the search for extraterrestrial life, told through the character of Dr. Eri Alloway, played by Jodie Foster. She is a respected scientist, orphaned at a young age by the death of her father. Alloway has had a lifelong obsession with seeking communication across the stars, and has given up what could have been an incredibly promising career in the world of astrophysics to pursue SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. She spends hours simply listening to the universe, hoping to hear a signal. She is constantly at odds with David Drumlin, the president's science advisor, played by Tom Skerritt, who moves funding away from her research into other projects, believing it to be a waste of time and money. Alloway soon receives funding, however, from a backer, S.R. Haddon, played by John Hurt, who is a billionaire industrialist who allows her to keep working at the Very Large Array in New Mexico. Coming in and out of her life is Palmer Joss, played by Matthew McConaughey, who is a kind of celebrity philosopher and theologian, a man of deep religious faith. The two of them spend most of the time gently arguing about science, faith, and how we decide what is true. They also become lovers when Ellie is working in Puerto Rico. The film is based on the novel by Carl Sagan, who was one of the most famous scientific skeptics of the 20th century. And just as an aside here, I actually read Contact about 2 years ago, and I think it's actually a rare example of a film that is way better than the novel. I found it quite plodding at times, and I think it's a testament to how good a film this is, that it manages to take everything out of that novel, and I didn't feel like it was leaving anything behind. In fact, I did actually believe the novel elevates many of the themes that are contained within Sagan's book. The film has actually been in gestation as well since 1979, where a project was delivered to Warner Brothers and went through several development phases. And it was eventually published as a novel in 1985 after Sagan thought that the film wasn't really going to find a home for it cinematically. And it re-entered development in 1989 with Roland Joff and George Millett, who would plan to direct, and both would drop out, and eventually it would fall Robert Zemeckis' hand, who was fresh off the success of Forrest Gump. So the core debate of the film is essentially science versus faith, and the philosophical divide essentially works like this. Ellie's worldview is that truth requires evidence, measurement, and verification. And I'm sure Lance Armstrong wasn't the person who first muttered this sentence, but I certainly think it is worth repeating. Essentially, her worldview boils down to extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Palmer's worldview, though, is something slightly different. He believes that truth can come through personal experience, belief, and trust. And there is a moment in the film that perfectly distills this debate.
I read your book.
Here we go.
Would you like me to quote you? Ironically, the thing that people are the most hungry for, meaning, is the one thing that science hasn't been able to give them.
Yeah.
Come on, it's like you're saying that science killed God. What if science simply revealed that he never existed in the first place?
I think we're gonna need to get some air.
What?
And a few more of these.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Whew. A little chilly out here.
Yeah, this is nice.
I got one for you.
What do you got?
Occam's razor. You've ever heard of it?
Occam's razor. It sounds like some slasher movie.
No, Occam's razor. It's a basic scientific principle. And it says, all things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one.
Makes sense to me.
All right. So what's more likely? Thank you.
You're welcome.
An all-powerful, mysterious God created the universe and then decided not to give any proof of his existence. Or that he simply doesn't exist at all, and that we created him so we wouldn't have to feel so small and alone.
I don't know. I couldn't imagine living in a world where God didn't exist. I wouldn't want to.
How do you know you're not deluding yourself? I mean, for me, I need proof.
Proof. Did you love your father?
What?
Your dad, did you love him?
Yes, very much.
Prove it.
Now, of course, if you're familiar with the story of Contact, you'll know that an alien signal is received, and hidden within the signal are the schematics for a machine to be built, the purpose of which no one is entirely sure. Indeed, some people aren't sure if it's going to act as some kind of portal for an invading alien enemy to march through. And Ellie eventually becomes the person chosen to go through the machine. And it is, in my mind, one of the great sequences in science fiction film. She travels through a wormhole, and indeed it reminded me at times of things out of Close Encounters and Star Trek the motion picture, and it really is a marvellous CGI sequence and a really good example, I believe, of how CGI can benefit a story and not dominate its narrative. And this was of course all done by Industrial Light and Magic, and having watched the film again and building up to this episode, it more than holds up, actually, I believe. But eventually Ellie arrives at the end of this journey where she encounters an alien intelligence, and the aliens choose that a kind of avatar for this conversation will be her father at the same age as when he died. And there is a discussion about what the next steps will be until Ellie departs and returns to Earth. However, it appears from the perspective of those watching that the pod she was in simply travelled through the machine and out the other end, and absolutely nothing happened. There is literally no proof that the journey we saw her go on and the journey she claims to have go on actually exists. And what the film does so well is now Ellie is in the exact same position that she herself used to criticise. She has experienced something completely profound, but she cannot prove it. And there is a scene where she is at a hearing towards the end of the film in which she is asked by a panel to sum up what she believes happens.
And yet every scientific instrument confirms the IPV was out of contact for only a fraction of a second. Isn't that correct, Doctor?
A fraction of a second Earth time, yes.
Earth time.
Senator, I believe that the machine opened up a wormhole, a tunnel through the fabric of space-time, also known as an Einstein-Rosen bridge. Now, because of the effects of general relativity, what I experienced is approximately 18 hours passed instantaneously on Earth.
Doctor, isn't it true that these wormholes you speak of are merely theoretical predictions? There is no evidence they actually exist, is there?
There's no direct evidence, no.
Tell me something, Doctor. Why do you think these aliens would go to all this trouble, bring you tens of thousands of light years, and then just send you home without a single shred of proof?
They said that's how it's been done for billions of years.
That's very neat, Doctor. You have no proof, because they didn't want you to have any. A phenomenon known in psychiatric circles, I believe, as a self-reinforcing delusion.
Is that what you think, that I was delusional?
Well, I do think you may have suffered some kind of an episode, yes. I do. Doctor, I'd like to propose an alternate hypothesis, if I may, and I'd like you to bring your considerable scientific expertise to bear on it. To, fake a signal from Vega. What would you need?
You would need a satellite to transmit the signal, but it would be impossible to simulate something.
You'd need a satellite, and you'd need launch capabilities to put the satellite into orbit, and, of course, the message itself. To put something like this together, so complex, drawing on so many different disciplines.
Would be impossible.
Impossible. Impossible. Is there anyone who might have been up to the challenge? Someone with extraordinary technical expertise, enormous financial resources, someone perverse enough, eccentric enough to have come up with the idea in the first place?
Hadden?
S.R. Hadden.
You're implying that this was all some kind of a hoax, that he engineered this?
S.R. Hadden, a legendary power broker and manipulator in perhaps his final bid for immortality. Maybe he wanted to explore and exploit experimental technologies and get the governments of the world to pick up the tab. Perhaps this was his final altruistic gesture to unite the world in some common goal. Maybe all of the above. S.R. Hadden, a brilliant and complicated man. Doctor, are you familiar with the scientific precept known as Occam's razor?
Yes. It means that all things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one.
Exactly. Now, you tell me, what is more likely here? That a message from aliens results in a magical machine that whisks you away to the center of the galaxy to go windsurfing with dear old Dad, and then a split second later returns you home without a single shred of proof? Or that your experience is the result of being the unwitting star in the farewell performance of one S.R. Haddon, a man with the means, the motive, and the opportunity to play you, and indeed the rest of us, as pawns in the biggest, the most elaborate, the most expensive hoax of all time.
Dr. Arroway, you come to us with no evidence, no record, no artifacts, only a story that, to put it mildly, strains credibility. Over $500 billion was spent. Dozens of lives were lost. Are you really going to sit there and tell us we should just take this all on faith?
Please answer the question, Doctor.
Is it possible that it didn't happen? Yes. As a scientist, I must concede that. I must volunteer that.
Wait a minute, let me get this straight. You admit that you have absolutely no physical evidence to back up your story.
Yes.
You admit that you very well may have hallucinated this whole thing.
Yes.
You admit that if you were in our position, you would respond with exactly the same degree of incredulity and skepticism.
Yes.
Then why don't you simply withdraw your testimony and concede that this journey to the center of the galaxy, in fact, never took place?
Because I can't. I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything that I know as a human being, everything that I am, tells me that it was real. I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever. A vision of the universe that tells us undeniably how tiny and insignificant and how rare and precious we all are. A vision that tells us that we belong to something that is greater than ourselves, that we are not, that none of us are alone. I wish I could share that. I wish that everyone, if even for one moment, could feel that awe and humility and hope. But that continues to be my wish.
And what I find really interesting about that scene is it sounds a lot like conversations I have had with people who have had a religious or indeed spiritual experience. I have heard people say to me before that they have felt the presence of God, they had a moment of revelation, or they had an experience that had changed their life profoundly. And the interesting thing is, in each of those examples I give, I can't think of any way that what those people were saying could be measured in a laboratory. And that's where the tension in this film comes from, because things get slightly more complicated when we think about the science versus faith debate. Because when you actually think about it, most of us actually accept a huge amount of science without personally ever seeing the evidence of it. Very few of us, indeed. I would have absolutely no way of explaining to you general relativity, quantum mechanics, the structure of DNA, or how the universe is currently expanding. But I am perfectly happy and comfortable to say that these things exist and that there is an entire community out there of scientists and physicists who are repeatedly testing these theories and producing the evidence. But here is, I suppose, the crucial difference in all this, if I wanted to, I could go and look at the evidence. Science is public if we know how it is indeed testable, and importantly, it is always open to being disproven or indeed proven upon and expanded on, and even the language of it reflects that. I've had debates with people where they've said to me, in science, everything is talked about as being a theory, and I think it is an inherent humility within science that it does that. Science is indeed a framework that explains the available evidence, but it can still change and it can evolve. And I think an example of this, I think, came from when it might have been when I was watching a Brian Cox series, but he was talking about kind of like Newton's explanation of physics had worked beautifully for centuries until Albert Einstein came along and tested that and refined what we understand about gravity, and especially in relation to space and time. And even as I'm saying that, I don't even know what I'm talking about. All I know is that other people who are a lot more intelligent than I investigate and interrogate these concepts. But science is a thing that evolves and it adjusts itself as new evidence appears. And a classic example that I've had when I've been debating religion and science with people is people who are religious will often see the I argument as a kind of checkmate, because many believers will point to it as being evidence of intelligent design, and normally their argument will sound something like this. They'll say something like, the eye is so complex that it must have been designed by a creator. And on the surface, I suppose, that is a fairly sound argument. The eye is indeed, when you think about it, incredible. It can detect tiny amounts of light, it can focus across different distances, and it can translate, and it translates the world into essentially electrical signal that the brain then turns into this amazing visual world that we see before us. And indeed, I think it is quite extraordinary, but there's also things that we have to address. About 4 years ago, I noticed that I was beginning to hold books further and further away from my eye, and it wasn't until my builder said, why don't you try these, and put a pair of reading glasses on me, and I was like, oh my god, I can actually read and see again. And that is because the eye is not perfectly designed at all. In fact, it has many flaws. It actually works backwards. The optic nerve creates blind spots, and it is surprisingly fragile. So from an engineering perspective, I think it is, if indeed it was designed by a creator, whoever it was did a pretty poor job to many degrees. And when you think about it, I guess the flaws I have discussed make sense if it is evolving gradually rather than has been designed all at once. And biologists can now trace how simple light sensitive cells gradually evolved into more complex visual systems over millions of years. I believe there's a good example of this in the David Attenborough series Life on Earth. I think that's where I saw an explanation of how kind of light cells began to develop. But this is where I suppose the philosophical divide becomes more interesting, because for someone who already believes in a creator, learning how the eye evolved doesn't necessarily mean they're going to change that belief. In fact, it might even indeed reinforce it. That they might say something, well, evolution is the method that God is using. So even with scientific explanations, these are sometimes reinterpreted back into a religious worldview. But I think where the real deeper disagreement tends to appear is, for many religious believers, closeness to God gives them a kind of meaning, a moral grounding, and a purpose. And the idea that the universe isn't just this kind of physical, natural system, it is all part of this huge divine plan that we are here to not necessarily understand, but to believe we are part of. And sometimes this can lead to the perception that people without belief are somehow missing something essential from them. The idea that if you don't believe in God, you are kind of lacking sort of moral depth or moral direction or spiritual depth or a sense of a higher purpose. But indeed, I would say that I find many of those things in relationships, creativity, doing this podcast. for example, gives me a purpose. It gives me, I suppose, a sense of higher purpose, but it gives me a reason sometimes to perhaps not sit around scrolling on social media, and I get an incredible amount out of personal happiness out of doing it. It also, I think, can promote a curiosity. Yes, I love watching programs about science, and I read National Geographic, and I like travelling to other countries to see things for myself, climbing up a volcano in the middle of the Atlantic, for example. And also my girlfriend, I find a great deal of meaning and purpose in it. She adopted 2 young children, and being part of raising those kids has had a massive impact on my life. And as anyone who's raised kids before, it is certainly not without its challenges. And without those 2 kids, I dare say my life would be very different at the moment, not necessarily for the best either. And I guess that's the thing about scientists, because understanding, and I find the world infinitely interesting and rewarding, and that's why I think if you come back to the kind of the I argument, the fact that it emerged and evolved over so millions of years is just as awe-inspiring as any kind of grand design. And I suppose this is where we end up by the end of Contact, because Ellie hasn't stopped being a scientist. She still values evidence, and she still believes in scientific methods, but she now understands something she didn't before, and that personal experience can feel real even when it cannot be proven. And I think that realization with her brings her closer to the perspective of Palmer Joss, not because her scientific worldview has failed, but because the universe has turned out to be bigger than either of their assumptions. Now, of course, there is a twist at the end of Contact, which comes in the form of us learning, which is a detail which is going to be kept from the public, that Ellie's recording device captured 18 hours of static. Now, on its own, of course, this is not enough evidence to prove that what she has said actually happened, but it is enough to give us pause for thought and understand that something did happen, but the evidence is ambiguous, and the film deliberately leaves the truth uncertain. And I think the ambiguity of this is perhaps the entire point of the film. We are supposed to have questions and to not stop answering them, and it's one of the reasons why I love Contact so much and go back to it so often, because it does make you challenge your own viewpoints and your beliefs, and interrogating your own ideas, I think, is one of the most rewarding things a person can do. There have been a couple of occasions in my life where I've decided that I have been fundamentally wrong on 2 issues. I won't go into what those were, and coming to that realization was quite a humbling and enlightening experience. And I think it is a film which promotes you to seek answers and to ask questions, and perhaps most importantly as well, have empathy for people whose beliefs are different to yours. And I think it's quite remarkable that a large budget Hollywood film is able to do this. They are few and far between as far as I'm concerned. But it's not just the philosophical and theological aspects of Contact that I love. There is, of course, an exquisitely crafted film here as well. Robert Zemeckis is a director who, I would say for the first 16 years of my life, was pretty much a constant when it came to my film viewings. Now, I haven't seen his first 2 films, I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, but suffice to say, the films I'm about to read out now were pretty much on repeat, over and over. Romancing the Stone, one I've been back to this recently and it still holds up. Why can't we make films like this anymore? Is it because we don't have movie stars like Michael Douglas anymore? Or are we just too scared of being called un-PC? God knows, but what a brilliant adventure romance film that is. Next up was Back to the Future. I mean, what more can we say? It is one of the most iconic films of the 80s. That was followed up in 1988 by Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And Back to the Future Part 2 and Back to the Future Part 3 both followed in 89 and 90. And 2 sequels which I think more than hold up and do the Back to Future series more than justice. And please God, just please God, never remake or reboot these or whatever them. Just leave them alone, for the love of God. Death Becomes Her I did really enjoy, and then Forrest Gump, which I know it's not entirely fashionable to say, is a film which I loved at the time and I still love now. I think it's a real classic slice of Americana. I don't care what people say. And of course Contact, and this was followed with the double whammy of What Lies Beneath, which I thought was a perfectly acceptable Alfred Hitchcock-like thriller, and the massively underrated Castaway, which is a film it would definitely be in my top 50 films. I wouldn't say it's an all-time classic. I think that's for another list, but it is certainly one of my favourite films. I go back to it very regularly and I still take more and more out of it. And into the 2000s, his career, I think, has never really come anywhere near close to those earlier films. I think they have become more interested in experiments with what you can do with technologies than they are really rewarding films in their own right. So we had The Polar Express, which I know for a lot of people has become a Christmas classic. Beowulf, which I thought was it was the first time I really saw a 3D film that I actually quite enjoyed the 3D. A Christmas Carol, Flight, a film which came and went for me. The Walk, which was almost unwatchable. Allied, a really dull World War II film. Welcome to Marwen, and again, haven't watched that. The Witches, Pinocchio here, I haven't watched any of those. And I don't think one could accuse him of not experimenting. I just think his ability to pick a decent story might have gone, but his work in Contact, and I would say this now, I consider Contact to be his best film, and I also think it's the use of CGI in Contact which really stands out for me, because the CGI in the film really complements the story. It never ever overwhelms it, and that opening shot where we travel through space and we go out into the galaxy isn't just there to draw attention to itself. It's actually saying something quite poignant, because of course when we end our journey through the universe, we come through Ellie's eye, and I think it's a way subtly of saying that we look out into the universe and it looks back at us, and I think that is quite a profound moment. And of course then there is that mirror shot. Now I remember for years trying to work out how they had done that, and then I listened to the commentary on Contact and discovered that it was effectively a trick shot used by CGI. But I didn't mind, because again, it's a really good way of using CGI to invent new film grammar. And again, it plays on the part that there is an idea of the world and everything around us looking back at us. And I know for a lot of people, when Ellie does arrive and meet the aliens and they use a kind of an avatar of their father to make the contact, I know a lot of people were quite disappointed with that. I think they were expecting some kind of, I suppose, little green men and something slightly more alien. However, I think it's a really wonderful sequence, because obviously the sky looks surreal and the water is behaving strangely, and all the stars look incredibly bright. But this is, when we think about it, it's a constructed interface. It is there not to overwhelm her. They've created a space where a human mind can process and understand the message they are going to impart. And again, when you think about this on a deeper psychological level, I think it says something about the aliens which is far more interesting than if we actually saw them, because what we're being told is that they're not just technologically advanced, but they also have a real understanding of psychology, perception and consciousness. They understand there are limits to what humankind can do, and possibly as well, and this is another theory I've heard of Tim about the film, that wonderful machine that we see being built and the great sound design behind it. It looks incredible and it sounds, to want of a better word, slightly alien, but it could also be that this is kind of a test to see if we can as a species cooperate, build and move complex technology and survive the journey. It might well be that this machine is a form of evaluation for our entire species. And Zemeckis never overplays the point. You never feel that Contact is overwhelming you with imagery to impress you. Zemeckis is doing something far more subtle. He's creating a world which is kind of believable to a point. The fact that the aliens send through the blueprints and that we have the resources here on Earth to build them grounds the film in a reality that we seldom see in science fiction. And of course, in order to sell science fiction, you need a cast at the top of their game, and Contact does not fail to disappoint. John Hurt always brings a gravitas to any film that he is in, and the film has its very own tech bro in the form of H.R. Haddon, and we now live in an age where the Haddons of the world of Contact are very much part of our everyday existence. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, both of whom have interplanetary or at least Earth orbit aspirations, and if Elon Musk gets his way, we could end up with a kind of, if you've been watching the excellent TV series For All Mankind on Apple, our very own Mars colonies. But Hurt, of course, is brilliant. James Woods as well, as a sleazy governmental politician who instantly begins to suspect that not only is this going to be a good possibility for career advancement, but is also there to kind of act as the film's foil. And of course it's James Woods, which he does so well, and Tom Skerritt as the truly awful Dr. David Drumlin. And I don't mean that in a derogatory to Tom Skerritt's performance, but Drumlin is the kind of sleazebag who the middle manager who always manages to take credit for your work, and he does this in such a smug, sickening way. The way he feigns religiosity in order to become the person that goes first. One of the great character actors for sure, and for me he'll always be Dallas in Alien, but here I think he is pretty great as well. And Matthew McConaughey as well, and it's interesting how this is, you forget how long Matthew McConaughey has been around, and I think Parmigios could have been a slightly smug, condescending, irritating character, and I think Matthew McConaughey brings a lot of Matthew McConaughey into the role, which is, of course, he doesn't come across like that. He comes incredibly likeable, passionate and driven, and I think that the fact that he has that southern drawl brings a kind of romanticism to that character as well. And you can easily understand, and this is crucial, I suppose, why Jodie Foster's character is attracted to him. He is incredibly charismatic without ever being patronising, and has a way of articulating his arguments which really get the old thought process going. And I think it's fair to say that Contact has had a huge impact, not only on my film watching life, but my life. It's a film that has literally made me rethink and understand the world in a more profound way. I don't think there's not many films that actually do that. I can think of only a handful spring to mind for me personally. And I do genuinely believe that Contact may well be the greatest science fiction film ever made. And people might mistake some of its Hollywood gloss for schmaltz, but underneath it, there is so much to think about and digest. It is aging beautifully, especially, again, when I talk about things like the tech bros. And indeed, let's not forget, the film shows the uglier side of religion, the fanaticism, and how destructive that can be. But it's a film that has hope and heart. It isn't your typical... It reminds me of Star Trek in a way, when that was at its best. And I dare say I will go back to this film over and over again. And I can easily imagine the older I get, the more it's going to mean to me. So that is going to be it for this episode of the 24 Frames cast. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be back next week. If you want to contact me, it's 24framescast@gmail.com. I have noticed listenership increasing. So if you don't mind, if you can get a minute, if you do like the show, leave a review wherever you can, especially on iTunes, as it certainly helps get the word out. But many thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon. Bye.